What's going on, Rasheen?
Thank you for having me, Joseph. I appreciate it.
It's so good to have you, man. So I know you well, but if you can just maybe articulate to the folks who are watching kind of who you are, your profession, I think it'll add good context to an important conversation.
Sure. My name is Rasheim Donaldson. I'm an attorney. I was born and raised in New York City. I worked in the adult criminal justice system for some time. Now I work in the juvenile justice system as a prosecutor. And so I'm here to talk with you about my work and some issues that I think are prevalent and that need to be talked about today.
Yeah, so we're obviously focusing a lot about men, fathers, but we're looking at a different specific area, which is around incarceration of our black men. So, I mean, you've seen the data, right? I think I was reading some statistics that said between 1975 and 2005, US population grew 44%, but prison population grew 700%. And when you look at the demographics of people who are in prison, 60% of people are of color. So I guess my question to you is, to start, and people want to know, why is that the case? Why is it that most of the people who are incarcerated are men that look just like you and I?
And just to note, as a black prosecutor, those numbers bother me. It's very alarming. And I think, to put it in context, we think about the history of the country, particularly African Americans, those who were descendant of slaves. We have this history of involuntary servitude, then we had Reconstruction, we had Jim Crow, and some people coin this, mass incarceration is to be the new Jim Crow. I wouldn't take it that far, but what I would say is that it is very disturbing because it particularly affects men of color.
Yeah.
And the reason I brought up the history is because the context is very important. We have men who were historically disenfranchised, couldn't vote, couldn't earn, couldn't own, and are suddenly a part of urban environments, low-income environments, densely populated environments, without the same opportunities, essentially a disadvantage at the race, not a level playing field. And so many people can trace the surges in crime in certain neighborhoods or the disproportionate numbers of people of color in the criminal justice system to lack of economic opportunity, marginalization, outright racism, disadvantage. And the reason we get there is because if you ever looked at the data, and even within certain cities, the major cities where the hot spots are of crime, there'll be certain areas and there'll be densely populated areas, and you'll look at the level of joblessness, very high.
Of course.
You'll look at the births out of wedlock, very high. You'll look at the lack of economic opportunity, the failing schools. All of those numbers really swing in favor of high crime and the perpetuation of violence. So those are some of the issues. So I think it's a race thing, it's a class thing. All of these issues are connected because we have people of color who live in neighborhoods that might be considered high crime and don't have as many options as others. So when I look at it, it seems inherently unfair. We're told about this meritocracy, you work hard, you're gonna get results, but that doesn't always ring true in certain environments. So when I look at some young people who come into the system and then I hear about their home environment, no father in the foster care system, parents not educated, it's really alarming to think that these kids would have the same outcomes or the same opportunities as someone in suburbia. So, I don't look at it as just a criminal justice issue. I think it's a civil rights issue. It's a public health issue. There's so many other variables that are not just directly related to crime.
Yeah. So I mean, we talk about, and you bring up a lot of good points, and I want to kind of double click on some of those areas. Specifically, you talk about people of color being incarcerated, tying to economics and so forth. I want to highlight just black men. I think I was reading some data that says black men are 6 times more likely to be in prison than white men, and are 2 times more likely than the Latinos. As a prosecutor, do you think that black men are being targeted?
I wouldn't use the word targeted. I think what I feel is more like a recipe for disaster. You have men in certain environments who haven't had the opportunities to earn, who may not have had a viable family structure, strong family structure. They're in a neighborhood that could be over-policed. they are in situations where they need to earn. And so some of these situations, not every situation, are sometimes crimes of poverty. And when you look at the way sometimes police departments are set up to be concentrated, to have high patrol areas in certain neighborhoods, and coincidentally, you have black men who are in these neighborhoods who are committing acts that may be against the law. So you have an over-policing, you have economic failure, you have the failures of the school system, and so you have people who find criminal activity that could be more attractive and more available to them than mainstream America.
So, but do you think there's systemic racism in our criminal justice system?
Yes. So systemic racism is, I wouldn't say, see, the law is supposed to be an objective set of norms. It's supposed to apply to everyone equally. But when you look at the courts, and even in the criminal context, you have court officers, you have court clerks, you have a judge, you have defenders, you have prosecutors, and you have police officers. All of these people are humans. All of us humans are imperfect. So when you think about the idea of implicit bias, if you think about the idea that some people police neighborhoods that they're not familiar with, if you think about the idea of what I talked about before, the idea of history and slavery, the idea that I can subjugate this group because they are inferior to me. Some people believe that, white supremacy is something that rings true today. Some people think that people of color, their bodies are not valued the same way as others. Yeah. So if anyone in the criminal justice system has any of those attitudes and beliefs, you better believe that a man of color coming through the courthouse is not going to have the benefit of the doubt. He may have bad experiences. So I wouldn't say it's for every person, but I do believe that bias exists. And if you look at a man who is marginal, if there's no statutory guideline, it's discretionary what could happen to him, is that prosecutor who may not understand this man, does he think he's a public safety risk? Will the judge set bail? Is there discretion there? And sometimes if there is implicit bias, that person will not get to go home. That person will be sentenced to the max. So I think that's where you would see racism.
But let me challenge that a little bit. Yeah. So we go Ferguson, right? Okay. You have an independent research that's shown that there's racism, right? Where they have to actually remove certain police departments. How can we not say that the system in itself, not just people are bad, but that the system in itself is not targeting or impacting or affecting black people? I mean, even certain parts of New York. I mean, you said you were prosecuting New York City, where policing, they're much more aggressive. They're going after, they're intentionally looking for. I mean, I think as people of color, you constantly see these cases often. It's hard to assume that it's not just a one bad apple or another bad apple, that there's something inherently wrong about the criminal justice system.
Well, the reason I don't like generalizations because, to me, stereotypes usually adversely affect black males. So when they see a tall black male like me, they say you must play basketball, or you dress well, you must be a hustler or a drug dealer, or, I feel like the stereotypes are not always fair. So I like to give things the benefit of the doubt. And if we want the justice system to work, we have to see how it plays out. So I think what makes laws flawed is the implementation. Sometimes it's the intent. If someone has passed a law that is supposed to target a certain group, clearly that's racist. But let's say, attempted murder or rape or robbery, if we can agree as a society that all of these things are illegal, they should be bad, the person who commits these acts should be punished, then that in itself is not a racist law. But then if we find that black men are convicted at a much higher rate or are getting harsher sentences for the same offenses, that is racist. However, we have to look at the source of the racism. Like, is it the judge? Is it the public defender? Is it the defense attorney? Is it the prosecutor? So that's what I mean. These are human issues.
Correct.
So I think we would completely lose our faith in the system if we said it is inherently racist. I think it's flawed, it's imperfect, like many other systems, but I think it can be improved.
So how do we improve it then? Like, I mean, because you bring up a good point. I mean, there are people who are getting be accused of the same or convicted of the same thing, but much more longer jail system. There are people like us who are rotting in jail for a crime that our white counterparts probably not in jail as long, but a similar crime, if not worse.
Yeah, there's a lot of solutions. I mean, obviously in the legislature, people are voting for progressive lawmakers if that's what they want. Voting is a huge thing. You also have the jury system. In many criminal cases, the jury decides the fate of the accused. And if the public believes that, this case shouldn't be brought, then it should be an acquittal. If there's not enough evidence, there should be an acquittal. But like more to the point, we need more people in positions of power. The reason I am a prosecutor and I started out as one is because I saw the value of the seat at the table. We need people. If this system is going to exist and decisions are going to be made, we need people who understand the communities to be a part of this. We need politicians, we need judges, we need police officers. Some people think community policing is a really important part of this process so that people trust officers and trust the system, so they're more likely to follow it. So this idea of procedural justice, that people are treated with respect and dignity, so they believe in the system. Then to the implicit bias point, law enforcement needs training. People need cultural sensitivity training. People need to understand mental health. There's so many other needs that are not just in the community, but also for the people who are integrated in the community. And also, technically, like one legal thing is mandatory minimums. This is one of the things cited when it comes to the disproportionate rise in incarceration is certain offenses had mandatory minimums, meaning if you had X drug, you will get, if you're convicted, a certain number of years. And a lot of that is driven by the legislature. So that goes back to the idea of voting. But then in New York City, for example, there's a gun violence problem. So there's statutory minimums when it comes to illegal gun possession. So, but the public thinks about that. The public has the right to change those laws. They can ask for that in the legislature. But I think some of what we're dealing with are public safety concerns versus the right of the individual concerns. And I think what gets very delicate as a prosecutor is still there are victims in certain cases, and it's also the need for community protection. And what becomes really dangerous is politicians don't want to be viewed as soft on crime because the constituents want to feel safe in their own communities. They want to be able to earn. They want to feel right at home. But people are also concerned about the rights of the accused. So trying to deal with that balance is part of a huge struggle within the criminal justice system. So there's several things that can be done. Some people want defunding the police. Some people want resources diverted, not necessarily requiring defunding the police, but also putting more resources into proactive measures like schools, enrichment activities. And I think both could be true. You can have a solid police force that keeps the community safe, that respects the interests of the people in the community, and also an investment in the young people. And I think that would be a huge investment.
So you bring up school, this idea of school to prison pipeline, right? There's data that shows that people who are when we're expelling kids or suspending them and they're getting kicked out, a lot of those guys tend to go to prison. Is there, what would we advise to the education from your perspective? I know it's not necessarily your area of expertise, but how can that help? What can we do there to maybe make it a little bit better? If you could just give me a quick thought on that.
Sure. No, I went to the Frederick Douglass Academy in Harlem. It was a public school, and actually when I graduated from college, before law school, I went back there to teach. And one of the things instilled in me were the values. And I think schools need good values, like non-negotiables. The schools need a culture that is greater than the culture of the streets or greater than the culture of criminality. And I think when kids are invested in the school spirit and truly believe it, they can achieve. And I think, zero tolerance policies, I'm not a big fan of it, but I do think that the distractions do need to be eliminated from the classrooms, but perhaps there's a way that could happen with kids being in school suspended, but also meaningful programs, because I think keeping kids out of the streets is, to me, just a plus. We need more enrichment. So the school needs to take on more than just the educational role of 7 to 3. It needs to also make up, because some kids don't have the right structure at home. We need teams, we need sports, we need structures, we need resources. So I think schools need to be more creative and instill values in kids that goes beyond just the traditional education. So, and I think schools, to me, if done right, can keep a lot of kids out of the system.
I love it, man. Look, you're a bright guy. So 2 quick questions and to wrap this up. One is, we had this in a session that we did at a seat at the table where we talked about Black fathers, and one of the folks talked about, or 2 of them actually said, look, my dad was incarcerated. How do you think the incarceration of Black men is affecting the Black home?
I think it's crippling. I personally had members of my family who were incarcerated. And then I've also had people who are victims of crime. So, I've seen both sides of it, and it's troubling. I mean, for the man incarcerated himself, you have the idea of him being disenfranchised, not physically being home, not spiritually and soulfully being a part of the family. Then you have the exposure to the prisons or the jail system that, it's obviously humiliating. It incapacitates the man from society, and it does a lot. And then the fabric of the family is deteriorated because you have, at least if there's a kid without a parent figure, you have a breakdown in values, you have the lack of self-esteem, and then you also might have a family that views the justice system as something that has destroyed their family.
Yeah.
And not to mention the loss of resources, the loss of income, and for some people, the lack of ability to vote or live in certain neighborhoods or to receive certain benefits. So I think it's a huge problem, and I think in many progressive places, and employers are looking at ways to not cripple these men who are re-entering society and figuring out ways to make it better for them. But that is a huge problem.
Let me just pause you there, because that's an extremely important part. We have a lot of black men who are going to prison, who want to come out and they want to do right. They can't get no work, can't get a job. I'll give you an example. I had a friend of mine who, I remember him, he actually met me at church, young cat, maybe 25 years old, he got locked up. He came to me in tears. He said, listen, man, I don't want to be in these streets. I want to work. I have a daughter, man, but I can't put food because nobody want to hire me. What am I supposed to, what guidance do we give to that young black kid?
The guidance I would give is stay strong. I think, Tupac had a poem called Ambition Over Adversity. I think that's really the perspective we need to have. I was listening to an interview of a lawyer, and he was talking about how he still has hope, even though he deals with death penalty cases, and he was talking about faith and the idea that we have people who are descendants of slaves in this country, people who have escaped lynching, people who have had their families devastated, violated in so many different ways, and yet we still rise. So we've been through worse, and it will get better. We've had a black president, now we're gonna have a black female vice president. Those are exceptions, I think, to many rules or many statistics, but I think that demonstrates promise. We have black people doing things that were never done before, so we just have to keep hope alive. That's the only way I see promise in the future, is that we have to believe.
Attorney, I love talking to you, man. Look, this is a topic that is affecting. I mean, for viewers who are watching, there's a high chance that either we have someone in our family who's been incarcerated, or we know someone in incarceration. You brought up a good point that it's not just the families who are impacted, but there's also victims, right? Who are part of a criminal act or whatever could have happened. And so our hearts go out to them. But if we're gonna really fix the home and we're gonna fix the black family, right? We do have to address this topic of incarceration of our black men. I don't think that we're more evil than other races, even though we only make up, as black people, 13% of the population, but 36% of the jail system. So look, we gotta get better, but thank you so much for taking this time to talk with us. If there's maybe one word, or not a word, that's tough, but if there's like a quick sentence or two that you can just share with the folks who are watching, who probably have a family member, a parent, or a sibling, or a child who's incarcerated, as an attorney and as a prosecutor, I would love for you to maybe just give them a couple words of wisdom before we wrap this thing up.
I'll quote Maya Angelou. She said, "I'm the hope and the dream of a slave." And so if you could think about how far we've been historically and how much more we have to obtain and what we can do, I think the possibilities are limitless. So we may be down at times, but things do get better. Have faith, be strong, support each other. Most importantly, invest in the youth. Our youth are the future. And I think if we can treat our young people and teach them to have knowledge of self, knowledge of history, they'll realize their worth. And we need to support our communities and do a lot more than what we are doing. And I think, each collective family can contribute. We have to mentor young people. We have to invest, even if it's not just money, our time and our abilities to making young people better.
Rasheem, you're not just a good person, you're a good father. And I thank you so much for just waking up daily and fighting for us, man. Appreciate you. It's always good to have you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.